She was bleeding on the marble floor
Good
when the
morning. How
janitor
are you
made his
today?
choice.
I'm
30
doing well,
seconds
thank
that would
you.
destroy an empire and
Just getting
expose the
started with the
billionaire
usual?
who'd been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. Marcus Chen heard her scream before he saw the blood. The sound ripped through Meridian Tower's pristine lobby like shattered glass, and when he rounded the corner with his mop bucket, he found her, Lora, the receptionist who smiled at him every morning, the only person in 40 floors who knew his name, crumpled against the reception desk, crimson spreading across her red dress from where Blackstone had slammed her into the marble edge. "You think you can say no to me?" Blackstone stood over her, his Italian shoes inches from her face, his voice dripping venom. "You're nothing. Replaceable. I own this building, I own your job, I own you." The security guard stood frozen. The cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned. And in that moment, watching the woman he'd secretly loved for 6 months bleeding on the floor he'd cleaned 1,000 times, Marcus Chen felt 3 years of carefully constructed lies crumble like ancient walls. His hands, the same hands that had once signed billion-dollar deals, that had built an empire spanning continents before it all came crashing down, gripped the mop handle so tight it cracked. For 3 years, he'd hidden behind this uniform, $43 million sleeping in Swiss accounts while he punished himself with minimum wage and invisibility. But Lora had seen him. Really seen him. The only light in his self-imposed darkness. And now she was bleeding because he'd been too much of a coward to use the power he'd buried. "Step away from her." His voice came out different, not the soft-spoken janitor's mumble but the commanding tone that had once made boardrooms fall silent. Blackstone turned, his eyes narrowing at the janitor who dared speak. "Did you just give me an order? You. The man who cleans my toilets." Marcus dropped the mop. The sound it made hitting the floor was like a sword being drawn. Because Richard Blackstone had just made the last mistake of his life, he'd hurt the only person who made Marcus Chen want to be more than a ghost. And ghosts, when they finally decide to become real again, can destroy worlds. The mop hit the marble floor with a wet slap that echoed through the empty lobby of Meridian Tower. Marcus Chen pushed the bucket forward, his weathered hands gripping the handle as he worked his way across the gleaming surface. Nobody looked at him, they never did. The executives in their $1,000 suits swept past like he was furniture, their eyes sliding over his gray uniform as if he were invisible. But today, something was different. Today, Lora sat behind the reception desk in a red dress that caught the morning light like fire, and when she looked up from her computer, she smiled at him. Not through him. At him. In that moment, Marcus Chen, janitor, nobody, invisible man, felt his carefully constructed world begin to crack. If you're watching this story unfold on Acts of Depth, you already know we dive into the extraordinary lives hidden in ordinary places. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about the people you pass by every day. Marcus had been cleaning these floors for 3 years, arriving before dawn and leaving after sunset. His routine was precise, lobby first, then the elevator banks, working his way up through 40 floors of corporate ambition. He knew every scuff mark, every coffee stain, every place where the tiles didn't quite align. But he also knew something else, something that would have sent shockwaves through the building if anyone had bothered to look past his uniform. The man pushing the mop had once commanded boardrooms in Shanghai, had signed deals worth billions with a fountain pen that now sat locked in a safety deposit box 3 blocks away. The fall had been swift and brutal. One wrong investment, one trusted partner who wasn't what he seemed, and Marcus Chen went from owning buildings like this to cleaning them. But the money, most of it anyway, was still there, hidden in accounts and trusts, waiting. He could have rebuilt his empire, could have walked away from the mop and bucket any day he chose. Instead, he stayed. He told himself it was penance, a way to remember what mattered. But watching Lora tuck a strand of hair behind her ear as she answered the phone, he wondered if he'd been waiting for something else entirely. She'd started 6 months ago, replacing the stern-faced woman who'd guarded the reception desk like a dragon hoarding gold. Lora brought warmth to the cold marble and glass, greeting everyone from the CEO to the delivery drivers with the same genuine kindness. She kept a small succulent on her desk, which she'd named Fernando, and she wore bright colors that defied the corporate gray. The red dress was new, and Marcus found himself slowing his movements, taking longer to mop the area near her desk. "Morning, Mr. Chen," she called out, her voice carrying a musical quality that made him pause. She was the only one who called him Mr., the only one who'd asked his name at all. "Fernando's looking a little droopy today. Think he needs more sun?" Marcus leaned on his mop, studying the small plant with mock seriousness. "Maybe he's just tired. Long week of photosynthesis." Her laugh filled the lobby like wind chimes, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. For 3 years, he'd moved through this building like a ghost, keeping his head down, speaking only when spoken to. But Lora had a way of drawing him out, of making him forget he was supposed to be invisible. Their conversations had grown from polite greetings to these small moments of connection, islands of warmth in his sea of solitude. "You know," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "I've been thinking about getting Fernando a friend. Maybe a little cactus. What do you think?" Before Marcus could answer, the elevator chimed and Richard Blackstone stepped out, his presence filling the lobby like smoke. The building's owner moved with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no, his Italian shoes clicking against the marble with military precision. His eyes swept the space, cataloging everything, missing nothing. When his gaze landed on Marcus and Lora, something dark flickered across his features. "Ms. Williams," Blackstone's voice cut through the air like a blade. "I trust you're not letting personal conversations interfere with your professional duties." Lora's spine straightened, but her smile didn't waver. "Of course not, Mr. Blackstone. I was just asking Mr. Chen about plant care. He's very knowledgeable." Blackstone's eyes narrowed as they fixed on Marcus, taking in the mop, the bucket, the gray uniform. "Chen," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "I wasn't aware we encouraged fraternization between staff levels." Marcus felt the old instincts kick in, the ones from boardrooms and negotiations, from a life where he'd faced down men like Blackstone across mahogany tables. But he kept his expression neutral, his grip on the mop steady. "Just doing my job, sir." "See that you do." Blackstone's gaze lingered on Lora for a moment too long, something possessive in the way he looked at her. "Ms. Williams, I'll need you to stay late tonight. We have some special arrangements to discuss for the upcoming gala." The way he said special arrangements made Marcus's jaw clench. He'd seen that look before, in a dozen different cities, on a dozen different faces. Men who thought their money and power entitled them to whatever, and whoever, they wanted. "I'm afraid I can't tonight," Lora said smoothly. "I have a prior commitment." Blackstone's face darkened. "I don't recall this being a request." The tension in the lobby thickened like fog. Marcus found himself stepping slightly forward, the movement so subtle that only someone watching closely would notice. But Blackstone noticed. His eyes flicked between Marcus and Lora, and his lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll discuss this later," he said finally, turning on his heel and striding toward his private elevator. Just before the doors closed, he looked back at Marcus. "And Chen. Make sure you're using the service elevator. Wouldn't want to confuse anyone about your position here." The lobby fell silent except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic. Lora's hands trembled slightly as she straightened papers that didn't need straightening. Marcus moved closer, abandoning the pretense of mopping. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw fear flicker behind her warm brown eyes. "He's been getting worse," she admitted. "The comments, the requests to stay late. I need this job, Mr. Chen. I've got student loans, my mom's medical bills." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear about my problems." Marcus felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. He thought of all the times he'd stood by in his old life, watching men like Blackstone prey on the vulnerable, telling himself it wasn't his business. He thought of the empire he'd built and lost, and the man he'd become in its absence. Maybe he'd been hiding long enough. Everyone needs someone to listen, he said simply. And please, call me Marcus. She smiled then, a real smile that chased the shadows from her face. Okay, Marcus. And I'm just Lora. Ms. Williams makes me feel like my grandmother. They stood there for a moment, the morning sun streaming through the glass walls, painting golden squares on the marble floor. In his peripheral vision, Marcus caught movement, security cameras adjusting their angle, following Blackstone's remote commands no doubt. The man was watching, calculating, planning. Marcus had seen it before, the way predators circled their prey, testing boundaries, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But Blackstone had made a crucial error. He dismissed Marcus as insignificant, a non-entity in a janitor's uniform. He had no idea that the man he'd just insulted had once brought down corporations with a phone call, had played chess with fortunes while men like Blackstone were still learning checkers. Marcus had walked away from that life, but the skills remained, dormant but not dead. As he returned to his mopping, Marcus's mind began to work in ways it hadn't for 3 years. He thought about Blackstone's business dealings, the rumors he'd overheard while cleaning late at night, the documents carelessly left on desks. He thought about the network of connections that still existed, dormant but reachable, people who owed him favors from a life they probably assumed he was still living. The memories came flooding back as Marcus worked his way through the building that day. Each floor held ghosts of his former life, conference rooms where he'd once negotiated deals, offices occupied by people who wouldn't recognize him now if he wore a name tag. On the 20th floor, he paused outside the glass doors of Meridian Capital, Blackstone's investment firm. Through the transparent walls, he could see analysts hunched over computers, chasing numbers that Marcus could read like sheet music. He'd built his first fortune at 25, turning a small import business into an international empire. By 30, he controlled shipping routes across 3 continents. By 35, he was untouchable, or so he'd thought. The betrayal had come from within, from James Liu, his best friend since university, the man he trusted with everything. In one night, James had emptied the operating accounts, crashed their stock price with leaked information, and disappeared into the shadow banking system of Southeast Asia. The lawyers had saved what they could, but Marcus's reputation was destroyed. The man who'd once been featured on magazine covers became a cautionary tale whispered about in business schools. But the money, the real money, had been hidden deeper, in trusts and holdings that James never knew existed. $43 million sat in various accounts, earning interest, waiting. Marcus could access it with a phone call, could rebuild everything twice over. Instead, he'd bought a small apartment in Queens, taken the janitor job, and tried to find meaning in simplicity. He told himself he was learning humility, finding peace. But peace had been elusive until 6 months ago, when a woman in a yellow sundress had introduced herself and asked if Fernando the Succulent looked thirsty. That evening, Marcus lingered in the lobby, taking extra care with the brass fixtures near the reception desk. Lora was gathering her things, and he noticed how she kept glancing toward Blackstone's private elevator, her movements quick and nervous. "Let me walk you out," Marcus offered, setting aside his cleaning supplies. She looked relieved. "That's kind of you, but won't you get in trouble? My shift's almost over anyway." It wasn't, but Marcus had learned long ago that some things mattered more than schedules. They walked through the revolving doors into the Manhattan evening, the city pulsing with its usual chaotic energy. Lora pulled a light cardigan over her red dress, and Marcus found himself walking on the street side, an old habit from a different life. "Can I ask you something?" Lora said as they waited at a crosswalk. "Why do you do it?" "The job, I mean. You're obviously." She paused, searching for words. "You're not what you seem." Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Sometimes we need to step away from who we were to figure out who we want to be." "That's either very wise or very sad," she said softly. "I haven't decided which." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the subway entrance. Lora turned to face him, the setting sun catching the gold flecks in her eyes. Thank you, Marcus. For walking with me. For. She gestured vaguely, for seeing me. Sometimes I feel like I'm just part of the furniture in that place. You're the only real thing in that whole building, Marcus said, the words escaping before he could stop them. She blinked, surprise flickering across her features. Then she smiled, slow and warm. Same time tomorrow. I'll bring Fernando some plant food, Marcus promised. As she disappeared down the subway steps, Marcus pulled out a phone, not the cheap flip phone he carried for work, but a sleek smartphone from his jacket's inner pocket. He scrolled through contacts he hadn't accessed in 3 years, names that represented power, influence, and old debts. His thumb hovered over one name in particular, Sarah Kim, investigative journalist, Pulitzer winner, and someone who owed him more than one favor. He typed a simple message, Sarah, it's Marcus. I need you to look into Richard Blackstone. Quietly. The response came within minutes, Marcus. The Marcus Chen. I thought you were dead. Or in Switzerland. Long story. Can you help? For you. Always. Send me details. As Marcus walked back to finish his shift, he felt the old electricity humming through his veins. He'd spent 3 years in hiding, convincing himself that power and money had corrupted him, that the simple life was the answer. But watching Blackstone circle Lora like a shark, seeing the fear in her eyes, Marcus realized something crucial: he hadn't given up his power to find peace. He'd given it up out of fear, fear of being betrayed again, fear of caring about something enough to fight for it. The next morning arrived wrapped in unusual tension. Marcus entered the building to find security guards clustered near the reception desk, their radios crackling with urgent whispers. Lora wasn't there, her chair sat empty, Fernando the succulent looking somehow forlorn without her presence. In her place sat a temporary receptionist, an older woman with a severe expression who didn't acknowledge Marcus's existence. Where's Ms. Williams? Marcus asked one of the security guards he'd grown friendly with over the years. Called in sick, the guard replied, but his eyes darted away. Blackstone's been in a mood all morning. Stay clear if you can. Marcus's phone buzzed. Sarah Kim, we need to talk. Not over text. Usual place, 1 hour. The usual place was a diner 6 blocks away, a relic from the 80s where they'd met during his corporate days to exchange information away from prying eyes. Marcus went through the motions of his morning routine, but his mind raced. Lora never called in sick. In 6 months, she'd been unfailingly punctual, even coming in with a cold once because she didn't want to leave the desk unattended. An hour later, Marcus slipped out during his break, finding Sarah already waiting in a corner booth. Time had added silver to her black hair, but her eyes remained sharp as surgical instruments. She slid a manila folder across the cracked vinyl table. Your instincts were right, she said without preamble. Blackstone's dirty. Real estate fraud, money laundering, and... She paused, her jaw tightening, at least 3 sexual harassment settlements in the past 5 years. All buried with NDAs and payoffs. Marcus opened the folder, scanning documents that painted a picture of a predator with a pattern. Young women in vulnerable positions, escalating behavior, then either capitulation or termination with a check to buy silence. His hands tightened on the pages. There's more, Sarah continued. He's leveraged to the hilt. The building, his company, it's all built on borrowed money and cooked books. He's about 3 months from collapse unless he can secure new funding. There's a Chinese investment group sniffing around, but they're hesitant. Apparently, someone's been whispering in their ears about his real financial situation. Interesting, Marcus said neutrally, though he knew exactly who'd been doing the whispering. Even in hiding, he'd kept tabs on certain players, made sure certain information reached certain ears. Sarah leaned forward. Marcus, what's this really about? The Chen I knew would have handled this with a phone call to the right people. Why the elaborate dance? Before he could answer, his phone rang. Lora's name appeared on the screen, but when he answered, the voice wasn't hers. Mr. Chen. A woman's voice, older, worried. This is Patricia Williams, Lora's mother. I'm sorry to bother you, but Lora said you were a friend, and I didn't know who else to call. She's in the hospital. The world tilted. What happened? She won't say, but she came home last night with bruises on her wrist, crying. She wouldn't let me call the police. This morning she collapsed. The doctor says it's stress and exhaustion, but I know my daughter. Something happened at that job. Marcus's free hand clenched into a fist. Which hospital? Mount Sinai. Room 4B. She keeps saying she's fine, that she just needs to rest, but Mr. Chen, I'm scared. I'll be right there, Marcus said, already standing. Sarah grabbed his wrist. Marcus, whatever you're thinking. I'm thinking I've hidden long enough, he said, his voice carrying an edge that belonged to the man he used to be. I'm thinking some people only understand one language, and it's time I remembered how to speak it. He left Sarah in the diner and hailed a cab, his mind already working through possibilities. During the ride, he made 3 phone calls. The first was to his lawyer in Switzerland. The second was to a real estate contact who specialized in hostile takeovers. The third was to someone whose name never appeared in any directory but who could make problems disappear with surgical precision. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and despair. Marcus found room 4B and knocked softly. Lora's voice, smaller than he'd ever heard it, called out, "Come in." She lay propped against white pillows, her red dress replaced by a hospital gown that made her look fragile. Her mother, a dignified woman with Lora's eyes but touched with gray, sat beside the bed. But it was the bruises on Lora's wrist, dark purple against her brown skin, that made Marcus's blood run cold. Marcus? Lora's eyes widened. What are you doing here? Your mother called, he said gently, approaching the bed. What happened, Lora? Lora's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back. It's nothing. I tried to leave last night when he asked me to stay, and he grabbed my wrist. Said I was being disrespectful, that I didn't appreciate the opportunity he'd given me. Her voice broke. He said worse things would happen if I didn't learn my place. Patricia Williams stood abruptly, fury radiating from every line of her body. I told her to call the police. This man, this Blackstone. Mom, please, Lora interrupted. You don't understand. He owns half the city. His lawyers would destroy us. I just need to find another job, start over somewhere else. Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed, his movements deliberate and calm despite the rage building inside him. Lora, look at me. When she met his eyes, he continued, you don't have to run. You don't have to be afraid. Trust me. How can you say that? Patricia demanded. You're a janitor. No offense, Mr. Chen, but what can you do against a man like that? Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, not the cheap ones he'd had made for his janitor cover, but one of the old ones, embossed with gold lettering, Marcus Chen, CEO, Chen International Holdings. He handed it to Patricia, whose eyes widened as she read it. I haven't been entirely honest about who I am, Marcus said quietly. But everything I feel, everything I've said to your daughter, that's real. Lora stared at him, confusion and something else flickering across her face. I don't understand. 3 years ago, I lost everything. Or thought I did. I've been hiding, telling myself I was finding peace in simplicity. But the truth is, I was running. From betrayal, from failure, from the fear of caring about anything enough to lose it again. He took her unbruised hand gently. Until I met you. You made me remember why power matters, not for its own sake, but for what it can protect. The billionaire janitor, Patricia whispered, sinking back into her chair. I thought that was just a rumor, an urban legend. Wait, Lora pulled her hand back, hurt flashing in her eyes. You've been lying to me. This whole time, pretending to be someone you're not. I was never pretending with you, Marcus said urgently. Every conversation, every laugh, every moment, that was me. The real me. The one I'd forgotten existed. Before Lora could respond, Marcus's phone buzzed. Sarah Kim, Blackstone just called an emergency board meeting. My sources say he's trying to push through the Chinese deal today. If he does. Marcus stood, his expression hardening. I have to go. But Lora, I promise you, by the end of today, Richard Blackstone will never hurt anyone again. Marcus, don't do anything stupid, Lora called after him, but he was already moving. In the elevator, Marcus made a call that he'd been avoiding for 3 years. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered in Mandarin. Wei, Marcus said, also in Mandarin. It's me. Silence. Then, Marcus. Brother, we thought you were dead. I need the family's help. How quickly can you move $43 million? For you. 20 minutes. What are we buying? Justice, Marcus said as the elevator doors opened. And a building in Manhattan. The next 2 hours moved with the precision of a military operation. While Blackstone sat in his boardroom, desperately trying to convince the Chinese investors to save his crumbling empire, Marcus's old network came alive. Lawyers who'd been waiting for his call for 3 years sprang into action. Shell companies were activated. Funds flowed through international channels like water finding its level. By the time Marcus walked back into Meridian Tower, this time through the main entrance, wearing a suit that had been hanging in storage for 3 years, Blackstone's world was already crumbling. The Chinese investors had withdrawn, spooked by detailed documentation of his fraud that had mysteriously appeared in their inboxes. His board members were receiving calls from federal investigators. And the building's mortgage holder had just received an offer they couldn't refuse, from a company that hadn't existed 2 hours ago but was backed by very real money. Marcus didn't take the service elevator. He rode straight up to the 40th floor, where Blackstone's office commanded a view of the city. The secretary tried to stop him, but something in Marcus's expression made her step aside. Blackstone stood at his window, his phone pressed to his ear, his face the color of ash. When he saw Marcus, his eyes widened in confusion, then recognition, then fear. I'll call you back, he said into the phone, his voice hollow. No, I understand. The deal's dead. He hung up and stared at Marcus, taking in the transformation. Chen. You're the new owner of this building, Marcus finished calmly. As of about 10 minutes ago. Your board is about to receive my offer for Meridian Capital as well. Given that the FBI will be arresting you within the hour for fraud, I expect they'll accept. Blackstone's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally a desperate kind of cunning. You set me up. The Chinese investors, the FBI, you've been planning this. No, Marcus said, stepping into the office that would soon be his. I was content to remain invisible. To clean your floors and find peace in simplicity. Until you touched her. The receptionist. Blackstone laughed, but it was hollow, brittle. You destroyed me over a receptionist. I destroyed you because you're a predator who uses power to hurt the vulnerable. Lora just helped me remember why I accumulated power in the first place, to stand between people like her and people like you. Blackstone moved to his desk, his hands shaking as he poured whiskey from a crystal decanter. You have no idea what you've done. The connections I have, the people who owe me. The people who owed you are already distancing themselves, Marcus interrupted. Your connections are severing ties as we speak. Sarah Kim's article goes live in an hour, detailing every payoff, every victim, every fraudulent deal. By tomorrow morning, you'll be radioactive. The whiskey glass shattered against the wall. Blackstone's composed mask finally cracked completely. You think you're some kind of hero? You're just another billionaire playing God with people's lives. What makes you different from me? Marcus considered the question seriously. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm just as corrupted by power as you are. But there's one difference, I've learned that power without purpose is poison. And my purpose now is very simple, making sure you never hurt anyone again. The door burst open. Federal agents flooded in, badges flashing, voices commanding. Blackstone didn't resist as they cuffed him, his empire collapsing so fast he seemed almost catatonic. As they led him past Marcus, he stopped. She'll never trust you now, he hissed. You lied to her. Played a role. You think she'll forgive that? Marcus didn't answer. He wasn't sure he had one. An hour later, he stood in the hospital parking lot, the adrenaline fading, leaving only uncertainty. He'd reclaimed his power, used it to protect someone who mattered, but Blackstone's words echoed. Had he simply traded one deception for another? His phone rang. Patricia Williams. Mr. Chen. Lora wants to see you. The walk to room 4B felt longer than before. When he entered, Lora was sitting up, her mother tactfully excusing herself to get coffee. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of revelations hanging between them. Is it done? Lora asked finally. He's been arrested. He won't hurt anyone again. She nodded slowly. And you? Are you going back to being Marcus Chen, billionaire CEO? I don't know, he admitted. For 3 years, I've been trying to figure out who I am without the money, without the power. Then I met you, and I realized I'd been asking the wrong question. It's not who I am without those things, it's who I am with them, and what I choose to do. And what do you choose? Marcus moved closer, sitting on the edge of her bed. I choose to be someone worthy of your trust. If you'll let me try. Lora studied him, and he saw her wrestling with hurt and hope. No more lies. No more lies. And Fernando? Will you still bring him plant food? Despite everything, Marcus smiled. Fernando's going to have the best care money can buy. Maybe even a whole botanical garden of friends. That might be excessive, Lora said, and finally, miraculously, she smiled too. Start with just the cactus. She held out her hand, the unbruised one, and Marcus took it gently. They sat there as the afternoon sun slanted through the hospital window, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way, in the most unlikely place. I have a confession, Lora said softly. I knew something was different about you. The way you carried yourself, the way you spoke. My grandmother always said that real quality shows through, no matter what clothes it wears. Your grandmother sounds wise. She was. She would have liked you, I think. The real you, not the billionaire or the janitor, but the man who made sure I got home safe. The man who saw me as more than just a receptionist. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. You were never just anything. You were the only real thing in that whole glass tower. Outside, New York churned on, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in its hospitals and boardrooms. But in room 4B, two people began the delicate work of building something true from the rubble of deception and fear. It wouldn't be easy. Trust, once shaken, requires patience to rebuild. But Marcus had learned patience pushing a mop across marble floors, and Lora had shown courage facing down a predator with nothing but her dignity as armor. The news cycle exploded that evening. Sarah Kim's exposé dominated headlines, and the fall of Richard Blackstone became a cautionary tale about power and corruption. But Marcus barely noticed. He spent the evening in the hospital, talking with Lora and her mother, sharing stories of his rise and fall, his years in hiding, and the moment a woman in a yellow sundress had asked about a drooping succulent and changed everything. By the time visiting hours ended, something had shifted. The walls between them hadn't disappeared, but they'd developed doors, windows, ways to see through to what might be possible. Tomorrow, Lora said as Marcus prepared to leave, I'll probably be discharged. I'll need to figure out what comes next. Finding a new job, dealing with lawyers. You don't have to figure it out alone, Marcus said. And as for a job, well, I seem to have recently acquired a building that needs better management. Someone who treats everyone with dignity, from the CEO to the janitor. Is that a job offer? It's whatever you want it to be. A job, a partnership, a chance to build something better. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility. Lora considered this. Can I still keep Fernando at my desk? Fernando can have his own office if he wants. She laughed, and the sound filled the sterile room with warmth. Let's start with a desk and see how it goes. As Marcus left the hospital, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, hope. Not the desperate kind that clings to illusions, but the steady kind that builds on truth. He'd spent so long hiding from his power, afraid of what it might cost him. But Lora had shown him that the real cost came from not using it, from standing by while people like Blackstone preyed on the vulnerable. His phone buzzed with messages from his old life, congratulations, questions, offers to celebrate his return. He ignored them all except one, from Wei, welcome back, brother. The family is proud. Marcus typed back, I'm not back. I'm finally moving forward. The next morning, he arrived at Meridian Tower to find a crowd of employees gathered in the lobby, uncertain about their futures. He recognized many faces, security guards who'd shared their coffee with him, cleaning staff who'd worked alongside him, office workers who'd never known his name. And there, by the reception desk, stood Lora in a navy blue dress, Fernando the succulent in her hands. Thought I'd get a head start on my new job, she said, her smile tentative but real. If the offer still stands. It stands, Marcus assured her. Then, turning to address the crowd, he raised his voice. I know you're all wondering what happens next. Let me be clear, everyone keeps their job. In fact, we're raising minimum wage by 30%, implementing profit sharing, and creating advancement programs for all staff. Meridian Tower is going to prove that success doesn't require stepping on others to rise. The applause started slowly, then built to thunder. But Marcus only had eyes for Lora, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? He asked, moving closer. Nothing, she said softly. Just thinking that my grandmother was right. Real quality always shows through. As the crowd dispersed and the building hummed back to life, Marcus Chen, no longer hiding, no longer running, began the work of building something new. Not just a company or a fortune, but a life worth living, with someone worth living it for. It wouldn't be a fairy tale. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt. But for the first time in 3 years, he was ready to face them. Because sometimes the greatest power isn't in what you can destroy or acquire. Sometimes it's in what you choose to protect, to nurture, to love. And in the lobby of Meridian Tower, as morning light streamed through glass and steel, a billionaire who'd learned to push a mop and a receptionist who taught him to see clearly began writing a different kind of story, one measured not in dollars or deals, but in the small, precious moments that make a life worth living. Fernando the succulent, now sitting proudly on Lora's desk, seemed to approve. He was already looking perkier, reaching toward the sun.